Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. This is a live episode we're recording in Discord. It's going to be a bit more chaotic than usual, but I decided to do something interesting. See, back in the day, I spoke with Travis from Bohemian show, and that also makes Americana for euch. At least he made it a while back, and he introduced me to Quora. And Quora is a site, for those of you who don't know, where you can just ask questions and get them answered, kind of like Yahoo Answers, something similar. But it's widely used, at least over here. And if you Google stuff, you're going to find answers there. And I, for a while, at least a couple of years ago, I used that to kind of advertise the show because I would find questions about Russia, and then I would answer them. And I hadn't done this for a while, but there's a bunch of questions about Ukraine, and we're watching two feeds of that space. One of them is called The Battle for Ukraine, and the other one is called Russia and Ukraine Conflict. So I'll be going through some questions and giving you some answers about this. And I will be noting everything down, and after this is done, I will be posting those answers as well there on the site. Because, well, what's the point? Meanwhile, I can see that there's, like, Brent Cooper there. I know that he listens to the show as well, which is nice. But yeah, everyone here on Discord, thank you for arriving. I hope that this is going to be entertaining for you. I will gladly read your comments in the chat. And to all of you listening, well, let us walk through this, because some of this stuff caused some serious brain rot. There are spaces and everything, and they're talking about a lot of questions out about just military perspective of this. But let's start with something simple. If Putin starts a World War III because Ukraine used United States weapons in Russian territory, will Russia attack United States soil, or will the fighting be mainly in Europe and Asia? Now, who asked this question? I don't know. And there's no answers yet. And I think I'm going to write there that if it's a World War III because Ukraine used United States weapons in Russian territory, Russia is definitely going to attack United States soil. However, that implies that a war shall start because of this stuff. I mean, Putin is not suicidal, at least as far as we know, and I highly doubt, and I will just bookmark this for later answers, I highly doubt that this is ever going to happen. Because, for one, if Russia would want to start World War III, then then it would have started already. And we have commented in the chat that the United States will give Ukraine a specific list of where to not attack Russia, mostly nuclear sites and some refineries. My comment on this is that it's kind of silly in a way about all these permissions. Because, well, Russia doesn't care about permissions at all, and they have found ways how to abuse this whole situation where Ukraine cannot strike targets, and at the same time, everyone's showing support for Ukraine and helping them to win the war, while not exactly winning the war. I don't understand exactly how you're supposed to win a war if your hands are tied. And right now, with the Biden's statements, well, it's only to be used in defensive measures. What's a defensive measure? And if you're defending, okay, then what does it even mean to strike Russian territory in defensive ways? I don't even know. And this question, again, seems like one of those which is, again, trying to put the blame for all this mess on the United States and the Western world instead of actually dealing with the problem. But, noted, and we'll answer this one. And there's blood stuff and everything. Oh, yeah, interesting. One Adrian Blackshaft, 40-year study of World War II, American Civil War, and world history, who lives in Anchorage, Alaska, asks, why are Western countries allowing Ukraine to strike targets deep within Russian territory, which is clearly a huge and dangerous escalation? Dear Adrian, Adrian, what is not a clear and dangerous escalation in this situation? I mean, Putin is actively killing civilians, and there's tons of war crimes. And Putin invaded Ukraine, and not vice versa. And would you rather have Putin escalating forward, or would you just give up or surrender? It's kind of weird for someone that claims to be from Alaska to just take such a defeative stance. I mean, this Adrian guy, he's an American, and I thought Americans were all about, not surrendering and having a backbone there, because this seems like a weird political statement about, escalating things. What's not an escalation at this point? I mean, today we also saw in the morning where a war correspondent, well, so-called war correspondent, they're actually war criminals, and these war correspondent things, the people who say they're war correspondents from the Russian side, are literally admitting that Russia is using chemical weapons. He posted about artillery, he posted about grenades being thrown by Russian side full with poisonous gas. Wouldn't you consider that an escalation? This is a thing which kind of interests me from these people, and he kind of looks like someone that knows some things. What then would be appropriate measures? We're playing an escalation game against a thug. What else people are supposed to do? I don't particularly understand this. Then there's another question from one Himawan Gutama who lives in Indonesia. And he asks, why has Ukraine not bombed Russian citizens the way Russia is bombing Ukrainian citizens? Maybe if Russian citizens were directly affected by the war, they might demand it end. Thoughts? With a question mark at the end. Now, this is a very complicated question. Of course, people all over the world would want to see Ukraine win and everything. However, this can be easily explained with the fact that Ukraine would lose support instantly if they would do such a thing. It's important for everyone who's supporting Ukraine, giving them equipment, to understand that they're on the good side. If Ukraine would start bombing civilians, then that would be a massive publicity loss and would be pretty horrific. This is just, and it doesn't make sense. I mean, also, Ukraine has limited supplies. They do not have the whole stockpiles that Russia has. And bombing civilian buildings and homes, well, see how that worked for Russia. They tried to destroy all the energo facilities, all the infrastructure of electricity and everything, and that just didn't work. It's a waste of ammunition that would destroy support for Ukraine, at the same time not providing any clear goals. We have comments on the chat here in Discord that the same thing with hitting nuclear power plants, and I fully agree. Like, you do not want to become the bad guys. And also, you want to win the war with limited stuff. And then there's an interesting question. Again, by same Himawan from Indonesia. Has Ukraine lost the majority of all Leopard tanks at this point? What's the reason for their terrible performance against Russia? And there's a clear answer there about the fact that they have lost only 13% of these tanks out of these whole things. And 13% is not most, obviously. But I would like to transfer this question into a more general question about tanks in general in this war. A lot of people consider that tanks have become mostly useless. However, I don't think it's the case. I mean, they are not as effective as they were, say, in World War II. However, it's still better to have tanks than not to have them. I mean, this still is some armor that you have to go through and smash with some explosives or anti-tank rounds so that combat would be won. It just makes things different. So that's a bit of a question here. But this kind of shows the general attitude towards this. Then we have a bunch of weird stuff. Why don't we have another question asked here? Why don't the Russians wish to engage with the EU? It's a good test. The world cares, I presume. An average Estonian has a high enough salary to travel there visa-free on a holiday due to their passport. Russians can't do so easily, so the rewards are less that way, ? Complex situation, but Russians can't really engage with the rest of the world that well. Well, those who can do, and those who can also, well, mostly spend their time abroad, and a lot of them have left Russia at this point. But a lot of people are just, living in poverty. And not like the average Russian can engage much. And besides, there's an issue with state propaganda. And the fact that, many countries at this point really they can't get into EU, and they can't be very well allowed into countries because of security reasons. At least that's what's happening in my country, in Latvia. Then we have one which is, why are Ukraine's drones becoming ineffective against Russia? I'm seeing a pattern here where a lot of people are just asking loaded questions, presuming things that are just not true. And in this case, Ukrainian drones are more and more effective. That's interesting. This is sort of a weird situation where drones and drone warfare has changed the face of war. And what it shows is that, again, all the generals are practicing for yesterday's conflicts. I'm curious here about why do these people just instantly presume all these things. Another question: If Ukraine tore down all of their Nazi monuments, would more Americans send them weapons to fight off Russia's brutal, unprovoked, full-scale invasion? Ukraine really doesn't have any Nazi monuments. The issue with the monuments, as far as I get it from Russia's side, was the fact that they dismantled Soviet-era monuments and tried to get rid of their Soviet legacy. That really doesn't mean there's any Nazi monuments there. And about all this stuff, well, how do I put this? Which I'm definitely marking this for a later answer. See, there's a Babin Yar thing about all the Jewish stuff and all the Holocaust memorials there, which Russia has bombed. There are no Nazi monuments in Ukraine. Then again, it depends what is a Nazi monument. There are very pro-Ukrainian ones, but I doubt that Nazi stuff exists. Then there's one from Dr. Colombo on the Discord chat. We hear less and less about Bayraktar drones lately. Is there a reason? Well, yes, because they are just not as useful in the current stage of the war. They were useful at the beginning, but they are less flexible than FPV drones, and they are useful to strike these tanks from afar. They're definitely being used, just not in such a major capacity as they were at the early war. It's just that the warfare has changed, and then, well, right now, they are just not as useful a tool at this moment because we don't have tanks driving through a standard road. Easy to shoot them down, yes, like Merle says and everything. And then there's something from Italy who calls himself Armchair General. Why is Zelensky so convinced that if Putin conquers Ukraine, he will try to invade other countries in Europe? Well, the question here is that, well, it's not just Zelensky. If you're listening to this show, you probably know that I also believe that Russia will not stop in Ukraine. And so does Macron and everything. And my clear example here would be that it is literally impossible for Putin to stop this war right now. Like, he can't really do it. This war on the Russian side is just there to perpetuate the conflict and to keep everyone in sort of under martial law. It's not about the whole situation. I mean, if Putin wins in Ukraine, he has to move somewhere because otherwise, what's he going to do? Ukraine is a huge country. He'll have to have a lot of troops there to even control it, even if he wins. And then what? I highly think that Putin will go forward because then, he as an authoritarian dictator definitely is not one of those peaceful people. And if he wins, that means the Western system has failed and NATO has failed. And then Putin will just try to test NATO reasonably instantly himself. Or, Moldova or Georgia or places like that. And in a way, I live in Latvia, which is in the prime territory for Putin to try and conquer. So obviously, I really don't think that they will stop at any rate. It really doesn't seem that, it doesn't even seem to me if, for example, people would allow Hitler to conquer Poland, that he would stop there as well, after all. Then there's more weird stuff. We have Patriot air defenses, lots of very specific military stuff. But I'm going through all the weird tanky questions. Those are just weird. Oh, here's one pretty good, which is not from trolls, which is interesting. Why do Russian teenagers online I meet support Putin and his illegal war? How can I convince them not to fall for anti-Western propaganda and disinformation? Well, I will tab this one as well. Please consider listening to the show called The Eastern Border. I hear it's pretty good. But in all seriousness, it's quite obvious. I mean, the teenagers in Russia in a lot of sense, have just been growing up with this propaganda system with Solovyov and Kiselyov, and well, those teenagers who support the war online, I guess, that's the result of educational system and ton of actual, propaganda material. As much as we hate to admit, that stuff works if done consistently, and especially if you've been hearing only about how the Western world is evil straight up from your high school or something. It's pretty bad in this case. And then we're moving on today. This is fun. If Jesus returned today and told Putin to withdraw his invasion force from Ukraine, do you think he would, and would you want him to? If Jesus would plop in today and say Putin this, then Jesus would be instantly arrested and given to the FSB. Interestingly enough, by the way, meanwhile in the news, Russia renamed their traffic police back to the Soviet era GIBDD, from GIBDD to the GIA. They put the old name back, and it seems that soon Russia is going to rename their police back to militia. So we're going back to this. And then there's a lot about Biden and everything and shells. Oh, another interesting question which I've covered here. Now that Russia is heavily committed to Ukraine, do you think its previous victims such as Chechnya or Georgia could exploit this and try to reclaim territory? Well, Georgia's party in power is called Georgian Dream, and they are led by the richest man in Georgia, the one and only oligarch in Georgia, yes, Ivanishvili, and basically they are just doing pro-Russian things right now with their new laws, which makes them kind of friendly towards Russia. Russia is trying to pull on some influence there, and secondly, Chechnya is going to be busy because Ramzan Kadyrov has tried to, ensure that his family and friends are, in warm positions where they could gain some experience with ruling. So he's basically put all of his kids and relatives' kids and friends' kids and everyone in positions of power, like in ministries and everything. So now we have literally 18-year-olds who just barely finished high school in governmental positions. But in general, Chechnya is going to be a bit busy dealing with their own problems once Kadyrov finally, kicks the bucket, because there's going to be a massive power vacuum. And this could be influenced by the Kremlin as well, although this is going to cause them some headaches. But in general, I think that definitely Chechnya is going to try to do something separate if Russia loses this war, which is going to be quite a nightmare situation all over the region. It's going to be a bit crazy. More questions about facilities. Why no one should trust Russia's ceasefire? Well, very simple, because, Russia lies constantly, and I really don't know I really don't know if anyone should trust them. Someone's asking, how can I join the Russian military? I want to join. Well, you would have to join up and go to Russia. I'm pretty sure that it's not a good idea to try and join them, but you can try. So, would be fun. I published on the YouTube channel, which I'm going to try to do something with. I published my drone footage from Texas, and someone asked that I should probably go to and still, volunteer for Russia, which is one of the weirdest things that I even know. Another question, interesting one by Brent Cooper. Oh, nice. How much of an escalation with Russia will the F-16s arriving next month in Ukraine be when they can be fitted to carry nuclear weapons? Ukraine does not have nuclear weapons. No one has given Ukraine nuclear weapons. They can be fitted to carry nuclear weapons, but that would imply that Ukraine still has them. Let me remind you that that Ukraine gave up its weapons for the Budapest Memorandum deal, where they were supposed to be guaranteed their territory and sovereignty, which Russia just, disregarded. So I don't really think that there are any nuclear weapons there. Another nice question. Is it true that Western sanctions on Russia have failed? And if some of them appear, what are the effects? And do they really only need a longer period? If longer, what is the necessary period? That's the thing. The sanctions themselves, they did not work as well as expected. Because again, we're talking about Russia here. And from Soviet era, people are just very much reliant on smuggling and corruption. It's just what they do. And they have enough friends in places who value money way more than they value, I suppose, basic human dignity, so that they can just smuggle stuff in. But it's all about, again, closing loopholes. Russia is hurting badly. They, like I mentioned in the previous episode, have stopped publishing the amount of gasoline that they produce and everything. So the sanctions are working, just not as well as they were supposed to. That again, a lot of things in this war haven't worked as well as we thought in the beginning. Let us see now. Russia Today. Oh, and someone asked, are Russian nationals having their human rights respected next to Soviet states? Well, I can talk about the Baltics, and I can say that definitely yes. I mean, the situation with Russians and the fact as they see as rights is quite similar to what happened of post-segregation United States. It's not that their rights are being infringed upon. It's just that in the Soviet era, a lot of them were used to having far superior privileges than everyone else who were not ethnically Russian. So now they're just, treated like everyone else. And for them, that means losing some privileges, which they thought were natural and common. For example, in independent countries where Russians are not the majority, you're supposed to know the local language. At least that's how it works here in Europe. And when Russian is no longer kind of accepted as a state language or something, and they are forced to learn the language of the country that they live in, they take it as some sort of an offense oftentimes, and it's presented as such to them in their propaganda and everything. What else do we have? Another question. With the rate at which towns and villages are beginning to fall in Ukraine, how long do you think this war would last? I'll answer that one also in written form. What towns? There are some villages being lost, but we're definitely kind of talk about any towns at this point. People, Russia is moving forward, but slowly, and they're taking immense amounts of casualties. It's not easy, but I definitely don't think that somewhere near this. And the same person asked the question, is the United States in an undeclared war with Russia? Well, the answer is very simple. Russia seems to think so. And everyone else is just, I think, blatantly denying the reality of what's actually happening. I mean, it's kind of seems weird to me when, at least on the Russian side, everyone is super convinced there that basically Russia is at war with the West already. That's how they justify all this stuff. Because again, due to their failures in the early war, they had to justify them somehow. And, Putin failing to conquer Ukraine is a bad look. But if he is at war with NATO and Russia in a proxy situation, then at least he can say, oh, well, it's all the evil Westerners who are fighting against this. It's just that the Western world just refuses and is in a bit of a denial about this whole situation. And I don't know, they have a case of selectively believing what Putin says and what Russia thinks. So that's a bit weird. Then there's another interesting question, which I responded. Why don't Ukraine's neighboring countries like Poland and Romania hit Russian missiles over south and western Ukraine? Oh, they will. They will. Well, I spoke about this yesterday on the previous episode, where I spoke about how the airspace is going to be closed in western Ukraine. So that's going to happen. Another interesting thing, why does Europe still trade with China, which helps Russia to fight against Europe? The China situation is very complex. The China, again, first and foremost, because we live in democracy and we cannot control what businesses do except by sanctions and in lawful ways. So we can't, if we would try to control what individual businesses do and their trade, that would be really bad. And China isn't supporting Russia as much as Russia would want to. China has its own interests. China always puts itself first. And what they seek to gain in this, I think, is turning whatever is left after Putin finally leaves the office, which he'll do when he's dead, to turn everything into some sort of a vassal state. Again, the question about how can I join Russian military is getting a lot of answers here and everything. Then we have exchanges of prisoners of war, more answers about copper IEDs. And this is here we're getting to the truly brain rot stuff. Why can't Russia just invade Ukraine like America did to Iraq in 2003? Both are plain countries with few mountainous regions. Well, Russia did. I don't even know when this question was asked, but Russia did, if you haven't noticed. And it's not going that well for them because of tons of incompetence. Let us see now. Russia being committed, Russia supporting things. What does denazification mean? Good question. To be honest, nobody knows. I highly doubt even Putin knows. Denazification is exactly as vague as humanly possible, so that, well, basically you could attach anything to this and still be off well. Then there's one about United States concerned about Ukraine strikes on Russian nuclear radar stations. Well, yeah, but what else can they do? It's a thing. Just because they are not hitting nuclear plants, but radar stations, I think that's fine. Another weird question. My teacher said the oldest swastika discovered in Ukraine is up to 15,000 years old, but Wikipedia reveals that the Aryans living in the Proto-Caspian steppes only appeared about 6,000, 7,000 years ago. So which race invented it first? Aryans are not a race. Aryans are an ethnic group. Secondly, swastika is just a very, very common symbol in the ancient world. And finally, you probably shouldn't be using Wikipedia as a resource for your schoolwork. Just saying, that's a really bad thing to use. At least I wasn't allowed that. I wasn't allowed to use Wikipedia when I was working on my master's degree. How did Moscow, the capital of Russia, become the largest Muslim city in Europe? Well, that's simple. The same way why, say, London has a bunch of people from, as they would call, West Indies, basically Caribbean and India. It's because if you conquer some peoples which are majority Muslim and then, try to influence them by saying that your culture is the superior one and the best one, well, then obviously they're going to go to your country, to your capital. And secondly, there's a bunch of Central Asian people who live in also dictatorships like Turkmenistan and places like that, or places with iffy democracies like Tajikistan and stuff like this, and all these stans over there. And they just want to go to Russia because of easy visas and easy work access, so that basically they just are there to earn money. And Moscow, Moscow is that expensive. People living in Moscow are either among the wealthiest and most liberal in all of Russia, and then there's a bunch of these Central Asian migrants. By the way, weirdly enough, Moscow, with all of its size, is basically, they have only 4 mosques there, which is crazy because Moscow is on par with New York when it comes to population. It's crazy, it's huge, and they have a bunch of issues, and they have tons of conflicts because of all this situation. Slovakia transfers things. People who set up camps getting awards. How much impactful would the Ukrainian strike in a Russian tank factory would be to the war effort on both sides? Well, Russian tank factories are nowhere near Moscow or the fighting zone. Russian tank factories are over the Ural Mountains. It's really far away. It's pretty hard. Hitting Russian tank factory would be pretty good, I suppose. As always, is nice. It's just that they're very hard to hit after all. Why is it not the Chinese ambition to take all of Russia when they know that no one would stop them? Well, Russia is big, and taking off all the land, people would be disappointed. After all, for one, if you just grab, if you do a blatant land grab, people tend to not like you. And China wants to sell their wares all over the place. Obviously, makes sense. What if the republics in the Russian Federation were to gain independence at some point? What would the future for the independent republics look like, and how much of a catastrophe this would be for the Russians? Oh, huge, massive, insane. The future would be probably civil war because of all the private armies there. Chechnya would leave. There would be a ton of scramble. It would be a mess. Definitely a mess. I think that's a likely scenario after all, and a bit silly because it's not going to be peaceful, not for anyone really. Why do Eastern Europeans, especially Balkans and Slavs, often try to connect with neighboring countries, saying things like your culture, ancestors come from us? Well, in the West, no one does this, but people still connect well with each other. What? Okay. Why do Eastern Europeans, Czech, especially Balkans and Slavs? Everyone in the Balkans is Slav. I presume they're talking about the Baltics, maybe, because Balkans consist of Albanians and Slavic peoples, mostly, like previous Yugoslavia. That's why it's called Yugoslavia. But connecting with neighboring countries by thinking that your culture ancestors come from what? I wouldn't say that they connect things besides some people on Reddit or something, but this was a very weird thing. At least it's not as mentally offensive like everything else. Overwhelmed hospitals, factory strikes. Have the Russians entered Kharkiv unengaged by Ukraine? No, they have not. The fight for Kharkiv is ongoing, and they are just not there. Why are somehow there are Falkland Island questions here as well, which is just confusing, which makes me weird. What are the primary drivers of geopolitical conflict in the 21st century? Well, that's easy. Well, authoritarian regimes, basically dictators. That kind of makes sense. Everything's asked, not to mention. Is Russian society secretly matriarchy that treats its own male population as an expendable resource? They're not a matriarchy, but they do treat their own male population as an expendable resource. It's because they always have. That's a thing that they have been doing since the Tsar era. Like, the people are a resource, and they're pretty cheap. They're definitely not a matriarchy. You should check up on the whole domestic violence and all sorts of the abuse there. Does the war in Ukraine risk becoming a frozen conflict for the next 20 years? Neither side is strong enough to launch a major counteroffensive to capture a major city or port like Odessa or Sevastopol. Fierce battle and changing sides in World War II. It probably won't be frozen, because this one can't really get frozen. And secondly, I don't think it's going to be lost 20 years. Well, at least if we properly help Ukraine win, because that's going to be a bit silly. It might stall down for a bit, but eventually no one benefits from stalling in any way, and just freezing it would be just pretty horrendous. Okay, and what do we have in the other group? Russian casualties. Do you agree with France and Germany, who say Ukraine should be able to use their weapons to strike inside Russia? Yes, definitely, 100%. I mean, obviously. Because, for one, we really, really should figure out how we could stop Putin. Because again, I firmly believe that he will just not stop with everything. With the recent purge of the senior military leadership in Russia, who is likely to succeed Putin when he eventually goes? Oh boy, that's the best question, which has literally zero reliable answers. Because just stupid. Russia is probably gonna at least get into a bit of a pickle with Chechnya and everything. It's gonna be a bit crazy. Something in French. Comments on Donald Trump about remarks on there. I have to check this. Some stuff about Putin not allowing Russia to Putin not allowing the West to give weapons to Ukraine as usual. Attacks by foreigners, Patriot missile system, the effect of everything. Bunch of this page is a bit weird. Are you surprised that Ukraine allegedly attempted drone attack near Putin's palace in Russia? Again, like someone answered here, they did launch a drone attack. There's nothing really alleged there. They launched this, and it's crazy. Someone's again talking about the Russian ceasefire, which should not happen because just crazy. And again, tons of loaded questions here. Oh, Belgium prohibits Ukraine from using F-16s to strike Russian territories. Well, Belgium is Western Europe, and they have their own issues, political ones, which take precedence over, military concerns, which makes sense to them, but is not really a happy thing for all of us who are living very much close to the whole conflict. And then there's one about how Rishi Sunak is now doing the 18-year-olds serving in the military, doing the conscription once again. I really don't know how that's going to work out. Definitely, Tories are about to lose the election. I don't really think that this is going to be much. What will Russia do now that it has lost almost 500,000 men in the war with Ukraine? Will the people force the cessation? No, they won't. Nothing's going to happen. The big issue here, by the way, is not about the casualties. The big issue is that right now they are getting... right now there's massive scandal in Russia because they have started just catching people in the street and forcibly volunteering them to fight in Moscow itself. And Moscow is a big issue. I mean, in authoritarian regimes, the capital plays a whole different role than in democracies. It's the main flagship of the whole country, and everything has to be clean and pretty there. And right now, that's a bit silly, because that really just disproves the whole idea. I don't know why a lot of experts on the Western side still follow Russian Ministry of Defense when they're clearly lying constantly, but just this shows that they're not as well, the situation with manpower is not as good as you would expect. But this whole situation about Moscow, it hurt more than all these casualties, because previously everything, all these people who had died were, either prisoners or people from the regions, from various regions of Russia, which are often poor and everything, and say a large Protestant Bashkortostan or Buryatia or Tiva, they just doesn't reach the same audience and media coverage than even a smaller one in Moscow, where people actually see all that stuff. It's going to be a bit crazy. Russian forces seize another village in Ukraine as War Machine continues. Yeah, well, the question here is the village strategically important? And also, that's called defense in depth. It's a thing that you do if you're facing a superior enemy. Oh, and someone posted about smaller countries. Oh, this is great. How effective is a combat unit made up of Putin supporting Trumpists if they were thrown into battle on the side of Russia in the Ukrainian war? Basically, if you would gather all the Trump supporters and if they would fight for Russia, how effective would they be? I really don't know. I hope that you, the American audience, who actually, mostly you have the Trump supporters in your country, you respond to this on email. I have no clue about this whole situation, but I presume that, there's a massive difference between being a gun enthusiast and just, able to shoot and maintain your firearms and being trained in the military. Random civilians are usually way worse than actually trained troops. Depends on the whole situation. Is it time for the Russia-Ukraine conflict to be decided by asymmetrical warfare in a main city? Ukraine defends at all costs Russia attempt to capture at any cost, and the victor emerges with a price of 500,000 to 1 million casualties for the other. City fighting is brutal. You don't want to fight in the cities. You don't do that because that's a bloodbath. This is why Russia keeps leveling them. And I don't know what the perfect time is, but in modern warfare, you really kind of normally you want to avoid these whole situations. This is why the cities get basically blown up and destroyed in this war, like Mariupol and Avdiivka and Bakhmut. They are just ruins at this point, which means that if there's a city fight, then it usually just gets bombed to everything. Do you agree with Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski that Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin will likely end the war against Ukraine only when he feels that he cannot win it? Yeah. The problem is that he's going to continue on nonetheless because, well, he wants to keep power and he cannot really admit all this situation. I don't think that Putin's going to keep going, but what I agree with this in this question is that Putin must be forced to stop. He's not going to do any willing kind of concessions. At this point, he's like gone all out on this situation. If Putin wins in Ukraine, do you think it would be the end for European American democracies? I'm not sure it's going to be the end for American democracies, but definitely it would be a massive pain in the rear for everyone living in Europe, especially me, because, again, living in Latvia right next to Russia is a bit of a pickle, especially since I'm on the nice little short list out there. Why don't the Russian people rise up against Putin and his corruption and oust him? Good question there. I'm now currently working on the edit of my foreign policy magazine article where I talk just about this one. At least it gets mentioned because I'm talking about the political apathy in Russia, clearly explaining, why this doesn't happen and why people are the way they are, which will, help you understand this question and allows me to basically shell myself a bit. After I'm done here, I'll go and finish the editing, and then we'll see on all this stuff. If you become a Russian due to the union state with Belarus, do you effectively get two nationalities in one and can work from Vladivostok to Minsk and Kaliningrad? What other countries in Europe and Eurasia, due to EU, are open to Russians? Any GCC? A bit confusing here. I mean, you don't really become Russian if you're Belarusian, and the Union state would just give you the citizenship, but Belarusians are their own thing, and I don't think that, people will want to become Russian. It just doesn't work that way. But again, what is vranье and is Putin using it? Vranье is the global term for basically brutal lies. Lies is a system, and Putin is using it a lot, which is a bit crazy. What has Putin done to get so much love from the MAGA people and the GOP in general? I have no idea. At least, those people who actually know about Russia is just a bit silly. And also, by the way, while I'm browsing through this, one thing that really is kind of weird is that right now people are all up in arms about Ukraine being allowed to strike targets in Russian territory. But again, there's severe limitations from what Biden said. I mean, Macron doesn't have an upcoming election, so he can politically say whatever he wants. And, everyone in Poland and the Baltics definitely still support everything. And it's a bit crazy. What do you think of Argentina wanting to join NATO? Don't know much about Argentina, but sure. Stuff about Austria once again. Questions about what the money would do. And a lot of these questions are just people asking silly stuff. 16 dead in the strike against Kharkiv. What Putin means when he talks about being ready? Well, mostly just bluffing to originate more disinformation and just make sure that the West would stop helping Ukraine as much. Isn't there any country around Russia that has not been invaded or threatened to control by Russian history? Why does Russia like occupying land while they cannot keep that people living better life like the UK? No, there hasn't been at all. Everyone who borders Russia has been attacked at least once. It's just, but that's by the way less of a Russian thing. More, it's just that this is what happens in Europe. Everyone has been at war with everyone else at some point in history, or been conquered by someone. It's just that we have a long history of attacking each other. Russia is just, they've been doing this a bit more actively than usual. Do you think the Ukrainians will organize a resistance movement like the Afghans during the 80s if Putin wins the war? Well, they are already organizing resistance movement. There's a strong one going in Crimea and all over the place. They're happening already, and so it's just going to be joining up of something. Because again, this is why I say that Russia would need insane amounts of troops to just keep everything under control there. Russian spy stuff. Why do Russians see NATO enlargement as a threat when it wouldn't attack Russia anyway, since Russia is nuclear power? Well, you see, that's the whole thing about Russian disinformation. Russia doesn't care about the whole insanity. They still claim that Ukraine wanted to attack Russia, even though Russia is a nuclear power, just like mentioned there in the question, and Ukraine wasn't. That didn't disturb Russia at all from this whole situation and this whole mess. It's just that people are told not to think about it, and then, well, they really don't. Let us see now. Best choices for Putin right now. Allah Stalin, he's on my rampage against Russian army. His insanity of invasion is imploding. No, he just wants to reform the army to be more like Western style. He just wants to make sure the Ministry of Defense becomes more economical stuff. And he's also acting from the position where he doesn't know the real situation on the front lines. He's being fed information that everything, is going well and according to plan. Has Putin increased the possibility of being killed in a terror attack after attacking Ukraine? Highly doubt it. Putin will definitely not be killed in an attack there. We have all sorts of news. Was Igor Girkin responsible for the war in Donbass? Yes! He admitted it himself personally, and he takes great pride in this fact. And now he's going to be sitting still in prison because, well, he's a charismatic person who knows what he's doing, and that really disturbs Putin's plans. But that's a thing. Internal Russian propaganda is programming its people to the civilized world originated in Russia. Russians built the Roman Empire and the Great Chinese Wall. Israel belongs to Russia, etc. Are they preparing for the major Russian expansionist war? The Russian propaganda is saying all sorts of nonsense, and they are technically at war with people. I don't know about the Great Chinese Wall, but according to Dugin and other people who are kind of political philosophers at their end, yeah, the Roman Empire stuff, definitely. It's a bit crazy how they just do stuff, but they've been doing that for a long while. It's nothing really new of this situation. And I will answer one last question here for the episode, but then I'll stay for a bit more on Discord to chat with all of you. Let's see now. Why do a lot of people support Putin on Quora? Because people don't know stuff, and they are not informed, and they're not really, maybe that interested in the whole situation. And a lot of people who support Putin in Quora, maybe not on this specific thread, but there's a lot of people there who are just paid to do that. The troll farms are very much active. I mean, they write emails to me and leave bad reviews to me. It's a job for some people, and some people just believe and fall for the propaganda. But that's pretty normal, I guess. But okay, I'll wrap up my recording of this episode. I'll remain in Discord Hangout, and you should come next time too. If you can make it, we'll make sure that everyone is informed beforehand. And yeah, we'll be back soon with the news. До свидания, товарищи. And remember, happiness is mandatory.